Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to TaxLink's latest webinar. This is the first in a series of webinars that we want to organize dedicated to, regional topics or topics strictly to one jurisdiction. We have the privilege of having two experts with us from Brazil who are going to talk to us about everything related to taxation in Brazil. They have 12 questions that they submitted, and we're going to cover a lot of material. Rogério Araújo, he had a pretty big work emergency, and he said he had to deal with that, and he's going to try to join us a bit later. But we have anyway here Ronaldo Applebaum, who will talk to us until Rogério comes and joins us in the discussion. Just to get some administrative issues out of the way, this webinar is being recorded. We're going to have a full recording for you available probably at some point next week. We'll also have a full transcript for those of you who missed it and who want to read up on everything that's happening in taxation in Brazil. At the same time, if you have any questions, as you listen to Ronaldo and Rogério speak to us, if you have any questions that come to mind, make sure you submit them using the GoToWebinar control panel. If you submit them, I will try to incorporate them into the discussion. Without further ado, let's get started. Ronaldo, do you want to introduce yourself for our listeners, please?
Okay, so let's go. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending from where you're from, everybody. So let me just introduce a bit myself. My name is Ronaldo Applebaum, and I'm a lawyer, a tax lawyer here in Brazil. I have been working with taxation for the last 20 years. I have been tax manager of some companies here in Brazil, like Santander, Hewlett-Packard, and Capgemini. And now in the last 2 years, I opened my own law office, and I'm helping multinational companies and people to deal with taxes in Brazil. So this is a big challenge when we talk about Brazil, right? So, and Brazil is very interesting. I was talking to Mateo and also talking to Rogério, because in the last years here in Brazil, we had a great change in the tax authorities' mindset. So now people are more concerned about investments and the role that Brazil plays all around the world. So we are trying to be more a safe place to make investments. People are concerned about the OECD. So Brazil is trying to be part of the OECD. We heard that Argentina is doing well, trying to be part of OECD. So it's that Brazil needs also to be part of that because of Argentina.
Part of the regional competition.
Right. Yeah. Nothing that is good on Argentina, we must have also that. Right. So we can see that Brazil authorities, they are more concerned about that. But on the other hand, and this is something that's very curious about Brazil, now we have more data available. The companies have systems are much more prepared to send information for the government. And we imagined 2 or 3 years ago that life would be easier after all the systems were set and all the data was available. But what happened in Brazil is that at the same time we are facing a big financial crisis that started 4 years ago, and we are still on that. People was not waiting to be on the crisis for 3, 4, 5 years, right, as happened now. So although we have better systems and more data available, and it's a bit easier nowadays to calculate the taxes, what's happening is that the Brazil government is struggling companies. So all the tax benefits are under discussion. Companies in Brazil, they had billions and billions and billions of dollars in tax credits. And we are not sure how are we going to deal with these tax credits in the future, because legislation is changing and bringing more and more difficulties to offset the credits. Right. So in summary, what we have, better systems, data is been working much better than used to be before, but companies are having more and more difficulties to pay the taxes and to use tax credits and keep the tax benefits as we imagined that we had before. So this is what we have about Brazil nowadays. This is the scenario, and also talking about the scenario, we have elections federal and state elections now in October. We have no idea about what's going to happen in Brazil elections.
That was good.
I think that the same.
That was going to be my first question, actually, since you introduced that. I mean, my first question to you, I mean, was going to be basically, you know, elections are coming in October, and what are some of the main challenges for the next government? I mean, will tax reform actually be possible in the next presidential term and the next, you know, whoever's in power next? Any comments on that? You know, to continue with what you're talking about.
Okay. So the elections in Brazil, we are going to have in October something similar. The discussion is similar that we have in Europe or in the United States. We have candidates that are right-sided, let's say, and candidates that are left-sided. And the candidates that are in the middle, they are very weak, and for maybe they are not going to win the election. So we will have a kind of radical government for the next years.
On either side.
In my mind, yeah, or one side or another side. And in my mind, this is something that will not allow us to have discussions about tax reform and all these discussions that we must have. So the financial part of the government will be very weak and will be very complicated. So I don't think that we are going to have big changes on our legislation, on the constitution of Brazil. They need to change to amend that urgently, but I don't believe that in the next years we're going to have any chance of happening it.
The country will basically be too divided to actually pass any legislation, or what's the scenario there?
It's complicated, let's say, because
go ahead.
Because it's hard to have an idea, because even when we hear the candidates and things that they have in mind, taxation, tax benefit, reducing the amount of taxes in Brazil. We have almost 100 different taxes that should be paid in Brazil. So this is something that is not under discussion. For them, it's not it's not something relevant that needs to be changed. And on the other side, what we see from companies is that we have strong companies in agricultural or automotive sector. These companies are working to have their benefits and to keep their life easier. But the service company, the retail, and all other sectors, they really don't have an idea about what's going to happen, and they don't have the strength to make things happen. Right.
Their power overall is not strong enough to actually lobby the government. Okay, got it. Moving on to the next question. I know you brought it up. You brought up the OECD and the case of Argentina, and I know Brazil is pushing to become a member of the OECD. I have a joint question here, kind of. On the 28th of February 2018, the OECD and the Brazilian tax authorities launched a joint project to examine the differences in cross-border taxation standards adopted by Brazil from those prescribed by the OECD. And at the same time, I mean, to what extent is Brazil willing to collaborate with the OECD in order to join the organization? What's the relationship between Brazil and the OECD? What is Brazil doing in terms of trying to access the OECD? What's that relationship like?
Yeah, it's very funny when you analyze the relationship, because in all this BEPS discussion that we had in the last years, Brazil were part of that. Okay. So we decided to join OECD to work along with the countries to make the changes that we are seeing now in BEPS. But this does not mean that Brazil really wants to change the internal legislation and the tax authorities. They are choosing what's relevant in BEPS, what we should accept or not. So to give an idea, now we have the country by country report. Right. So that's fine. That does not change the way we tax people and companies in Brazil. So let's introduce that. So now we have country by country report in Brazil. Right. But on the other side, for instance, transfer pricing. So all the legislation, all the rules of transfer pricing here in Brazil, they are not the way OECD recommends.
Right.
But we don't want to change that. So if it's going to reduce for some reason our tax burden, we don't work with that. If it's only to create new rules, new tax obligations, to give data, so Brazil is doing the homework.
Right.
So for me, it's something really crazy to imagine why OECD should accept Brazil as one of the members. Because we are not able to make any change on our VATs, for instance, to be similar as that we have in Europe. Mm-hmm. We are not changing the cross-border taxation. We are not making any change. Brazil is only creating new regulations and new tax obligations similar to what the BEPS determine. So let's say we are friends, but not as friend as we should be of OECD.
Right.
But considering that Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, they are in, I think that sometime Brazil will need to stop a bit, make some changes, and then I think that may be accepted by OECD. But not now, not in the way things are going now.
Right. You mentioned transfer pricing regulations that they differ a bit with the way OECD I guess follows them. Can you be a little bit more specific? I mean, how are the transfer pricing laws in Brazil? How do they differ from those espoused by the OECD? Just to give our listeners a better idea of what Brazil is doing in terms of transfer pricing.
Yeah, I think that the main difference between the transfer price regulation that we have here and in the other places that we are not open to review the percentage that is applied on the production. So to give an example, we have in our transfer price legislation fixed rates about how much we should add to the product in Brazil for not being responsible, let's say, for not being responsible for paying the transfer price adjust. So we have a fixed margins, like depending on the way, you have to have a margin in Brazil of 20% when we resell the products. Sometimes you need to have a margin of 60% when you import things and sell that in Brazil with some kind of transformation. So we don't, Brazil legislation and Brazil tax authorities, they do not take in mind what really happens in the market. So when we talk about commodities, for instance, okay, there was a change in our legislation that allowed companies in Brazil to take in consideration the price of the commodities in the open market. Okay. But this is not something that affects most part of the companies. So we pay a lot of adjustments of transfer price. So companies pay a lot of income tax on the transfer price adjustment because of the market, because of the economic conditions in Brazil, and there is no flexibility on the legislation. So what we hear from the other countries is that you can knock the door of the tax authorities and say, hey, this really does not make sense. I can show you the numbers, I can show you the documents, and let's create a special rule for my market. Okay. So in Brazil, this does not happen. Right. The same for everybody. Right. So companies are really crazy because all of them need to make adjustments in the income tax because of transfer price. Right. And this is the first change that could happen here.
There's no flexibility. There's very little flexibility when it comes to Brazil, I guess, in terms of transfer pricing. That's what you're saying. Exactly. Or that's what I understand. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay. Let's take a step back now and actually get into like some of the basics of Brazilian taxation. I know this was a question submitted by one of our members from Mexico, who I guess wants to get an idea as to the overall Brazilian tax system. He was basically asking, what kinds of taxes apply with regards to income and consumption, and at the same time, how does Brazil manage the concepts of dividends and royalties? Do you want to start with one or the other? How do you want to tackle that?
No, I know dividends are easier.
Okay, let's start with dividends if it's easier.
Yeah. No, when you talk about dividends in Brazil, it's something that is different from the rest of things. We are really free to pay dividends in Brazil. and you can pay that for your internal or external. You can remit dividends all around the world without difficulties. We don't have situations like we saw in Venezuela or in Argentina for some time regarding the FX rates and things like that.
Right.
So from a tax perspective, at the moment that you are able to calculate the dividend and you have the proper documentation, you can pay that, and that is free of taxation.
Okay.
So this is one thing that is still good here in Brazil. They are trying to change that also. There is a lot of pressure in the government because they calculate that not collecting income tax on dividends means billions and billions of dollars per year. So there is a big pressure on the congressman to approve the taxation of dividends, and that should be something around 15%. So my recommendation is pay all the dividends that are possible to be paid until you can pay that.
Right, right.
So dividends are really simple. When you talk about royalties, we have two aspects to take in consideration. The first one is the limitation for income tax purpose. We need to understand that depending on the agreement that you have, you can make there is no limit to pay royalties. So again, as the dividends, if you have the proper documentation, if you have the calculation of the royalties, you can make the payment of the royalties abroad without any issues. But there is a limitation of depending on the kind of royalties, 1% of your revenue, depending on the royalties, 5% of your revenue. This depends on the activity of the company.
Right.
So you can pay that, but you cannot deduct it 100% depending on the amount.
Okay.
And when you make the payment of the royalties, the taxation is huge. But there is something that is really interesting, and we work with multinational companies here in Brazil, because if you make a payment of royalties abroad, you have to pay mainly income tax of 15%.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes to 17 when you make the gross up and things like that. And there is another tax that we call that CIDE, C-I-D-E, that is 10%.
Okay.
So usually we have 25% of taxation on royalties. And if you send that to tax havens, you have a plus 10%.
Okay.
But what is royalties?
What is the CD tax exactly?
Yeah, the CD tax is about 20 years ago in Brazil. Okay. You have just income tax that was 25% for all the situations.
Okay.
They created this new tax that is called CD, and there is a rate of 10%, and they reduced the income tax from 25 to 15.
Okay.
And why they did that? The income tax in Brazil needs to be divided among all the states.
Right.
And this new tax, the CD, it's not divided. It's only for the central government.
For the federal.
So they create this new tax. Yeah, only the federal. But the rate did not change. The rate is still 25, the limit.
Okay. Got it.
Royalty is something that, although we have 25%, it's something really good to work because when we are remitting, when we are sending money abroad as services, the rate comes to 40%, mm-hmm. because we have more taxes on the importation of services. We have the income tax, we have this tax, the CD, mm-hmm. but we also have the EIS, the COFINS, the service tax. So although 25 is not a small rate for sure, it's much better to send money abroad as royalties than services.
Right.
So one thing that we do in Brazil, we always try to change the agreements, especially when we have multinational companies, from services to royalties.
To royalties, okay.
So, okay. So and when we analyze the taxation around the world, here in Brazil, we have just 4 countries that Brazil has the double tax agreement, okay. and that allow you not to pay the income tax on royalties. That's France, Sweden, Japan, and Norway. Okay. So in these 4 countries, you have tax clauses that allow you just to pay the 10% CD.
Right.
and not to pay the income tax.
Got it.
Right.
Got it. Excellent. What about VAT? How does that apply to Brazil?
When we talk about royalties, right?
VAT in general.
Or no?
In general.
Sorry?
In general, sorry.
In general. No problem. So, to talk about all details of VAT, we need 3-4 hours.
Give us a nice round summary if you can.
Yeah, for sure. So, I would say that almost 90% of the discussions that we have in taxes in Brazil nowadays, they are related to VAT taxes. Not only federal VAT that we call here PIS and COFINS, but also the state VAT. So let's start about the federal VAT. The federal VAT we have for sure the excise tax that we call that the IPI, that is when you have the industrialization process in Brazil. But this is something that there is not so many discussions, the tax is not being changed. Okay. We have the importation tax, that is the same kind of the excise tax, there's no discussion about that. And we have the famous, it used not to be famous when I started working 20 years ago. I just have to say that I started with 10 years old, 20 years ago, but that's fine. But talking serious, it was not an issue. But then they decided to create, the companies made a big pressure in the government. And this is fun about Brazil. Companies start saying, hey, all around the world, the VAT is non-cumulative, the VAT is non-cumulative. You have to change our federal VAT because it's cumulative. You don't have any kind of credits. So make a change. And then they said, okay, I'm going to change that. And they changed it. So they created a non-cumulative federal VAT. Okay. But what happened? They raise it, the taxation, but the government gives some credits. But the credits were extremely limited. So not everything that you buy, not every service that you take in the value chain, you can have the credit. So they created rules that limited a lot this kind of credits. And in the last year, after 20 years of discussions and things like that, we start receiving decisions from our superior court here in Brazil. Okay. And the Superior Court here in Brazil told us that the credit should not be so limited as the legislation, not as the legislation, because the legislation in Brazil is open, but the tax authorities infra legislation about tax credits on PIS and COFINS were not legal. They were extremely conservative and were not allowing companies to get a lot of credits that you should get. Okay. So what we have in Brazil nowadays for federal VAT, all the companies, all the law offices, the big four companies, they are discussing exactly how we change the calculation of the PIS and COFINS in order to find more credits and reduce the real rate of that. Okay. So this is ongoing work. All the companies are doing that. And this is a good opportunity. So if you don't hear that your company in Brazil is reviewing the PIS and COFINS calculation for the last 5 years, you should look at that and ask why this is not happening. Because for sure, in all the companies, we have opportunities of credits that we can take now. Okay. And in Brazil, you can offset taxes that you paid higher than you should pay. So it's possible to find credits and already use that immediately. So you don't need a judicial suit. You don't need a lawyer to do that. Okay. It's something that you can do inside your company, review the credits that you used before, and recalculate the PIS and COFINS. So this is one of the things that are happening. We have an opportunity for that. On the other hand, not on the other hand, but additionally to these discussions of credits on federal PIS and COFINS, we have another decision in the last year from the Supreme Court about the unconstitutionality of the change on PIS and COFINS that we had in 1998.
Okay.
So there was a new calculation basis. It used to be calculated not on all the revenues of the company, but only on the services and on the sale of products revenue. Okay. And they make a change. They say that the PIS and COFINS should be paid on all the revenues. Okay. So this was considered unconstitutional. And there is also a big discussion on PIS and COFINS if companies can already consider the credit in the balance. Okay. Because the decision is already taken, but it's not a final decision. There is still one last appeal that should be analyzed. Okay. And what we believe that Brazil government asked the Supreme Court to not analyze that, because they have made a calculation and they have in mind that this last decision would bring for the taxpayers in Brazil around $100 billion of PIS and COFINS credits. So it's a huge amount of money.
It's a huge amount, right?
Yeah. And the companies in Brazil are discussing with the auditors, the big four companies that make the audits, if we can already recognize the credit in our balance or not. This is something extremely important, right? Because if you have a decision from your auditor allowing you already to consider the credit, although you cannot use that, this means that our balance sheets in Brazil will become blue suddenly. Right. So this is also a very important part from tax department. If you are discussing the PIS and COFINS calculation basis, go to your auditor and already ask it and try to get an opinion if you can already consider the credit in your balance or not.
Excellent.
So for the federal VAT, this is the most important things that we have.
Excellent. Thanks for the update. I know this is one of the points that you wanted to bring up. Is one of the questions that you submitted to talk about the PIS and COFINS, and I think we've covered that pretty well too. So thank you, Ronaldo.
Yeah. No, welcome. And you asked about also the state, right? So
yeah, sure.
State VAT. Yes, the state VAT is what we call here the ICMS.
Okay.
So it's far the worst tax that we have to view and calculate in Brazil.
Why?
So this is crazy because you have different rules in all the states.
Right.
But sometimes people come to me and say, "Hey, Ronaldo, this is not a problem because in the United States you also have different rules in all the states. But what happens here is that one state does not accept the rules and conditions from the other state."
Okay.
Okay, so this is our big problem. So sometimes you have a tax benefit, and this happens a lot. So we have a state here in Brazil that is Santa Catarina, that has a tax benefit that you can make the importation of products in Santa Catarina and you pay less ICMS. But when we resell your products to the other states of Brazil, the other state does not recognize the legislation of Santa Catarina as something legal.
Right.
So they do not allow you to get the credit.
Right.
So you pay twice, not twice, but you pay 2 times the ICMS, let's say, because you are not allowed to get the credit.
Right.
And you have a structure, you create your business based on the tax benefits.
Right.
But then the tax benefit is not allowed depending on the way you sell. So also in the last year, there was a very important legislation. It's the Complementary Law 160. All the states decided to stop a bit the war and say, hey, let's create something that allow tax benefits to be considered, that does not change the past, does not change what was done, but creates specific rules for the future.
Okay.
So now I say that's a bit more safe. All the states in Brazil have a lot of things to do, until the end of this year now, until the end of 18. So we are in a period where the tax benefits of the states, they're not legal, but on the other hand, they are not under pressure.
Okay.
So so you can make the importation in states that has tax benefits. You can take the credit of the ICMS on these importations. The states like São Paulo was very furious about that and was sending tax assessments for everybody. They stopped to do that. So we are in a period that's calm for this kind of discussions of tax benefits in Brazil. And this is something that maybe we are going to have a reduction on these discussions for the next time.
Right.
What we have now is that crazy about the state VAT, is the new technologies.
Okay. That's actually,
there's a big discussion.
Actually, you know, we're going to get into the new technologies because I just got a question from one of our listeners, and he's actually asking about the electronic tax system in Brazil, and you know how the tax authority has actually, you know, I guess controlled taxpayers with the technology. How is it working for taxpayers? So I mean, let's get into this new technology discussion. And so go ahead with what you were saying about state VATs, and we can take a little closer look at the electronic tax system and you know how it has operated, I guess, or how successful it has been.
Okay. No, just to clarify before, when I was talking about the new technologies and the state VAT, I was talking about what tax should be paid on the new technologies, and not exactly the impact of the new technology. So just
perfect.
There is a big discussion now. We will talk about software as a service, streaming, downloads.
Right.
If you should pay the state tax or the municipal tax.
Okay.
Because it's not clear for Brazil authorities. For instance, Spotify. So that service or is that is not service.
Right.
So if you consider that Spotify, or if you consider the Apple Store or the Google Play Store as service, you have to pay taxes for the municipality.
Right.
If you consider that not services, but it's a kind of, let's say, product.
Right.
So if it's a good, although it's not something that you can put your hands on that, you have to pay the tax for the state tax.
Okay.
So this is something to be really careful. If your company deal with new technologies,
right,
you really have to be careful, because not only the state but the municipality both want to get the taxes on this new products, right?
Excellent.
And excellent. So, and this question about the new technologies, this is something crazy about Brazil. Brazil is known, the tax authorities in Brazil, they are known as to be very, very advanced in collecting data and treating numbers. And they used to say here that here in our federal capital in Brasilia, that there is a big computer from tax authorities that is as huge as Maracanã Stadium, and that nobody can see that because it's underground.
Oh, right. There you go.
So you see,
right.
The people here, they are really crazy about that, because they keep asking us tons and tons and millions of numbers, information. So all details about all the transactions that you have. So if you need to issue an invoice, for instance, I would say that an invoice in Brazil, you have at least 20, 25 different information that go to inside the invoice.
Okay.
And the invoice must be sent to the government, and you can only use that invoice if that's approved for the government. So you send the file and you receive an answer, and this is all online, electronic. It's something that happens in seconds.
Right.
But the amount of information is. And now in Brazil this year, they started to ask the same amount of information about payroll taxes that we didn't have before. So you have to send details about all the kind of payments, reimbursement that you do for your employees. So it's a huge amount of information. To be very honest, we send the information. So in the last 3-4 years, especially with SPED, with ECF, that the names that we have in Brazil, we started sending details and details about all kinds of information inside the company that you can imagine from the government.
Right.
And we had no idea about what were they doing with that. Because let's say the amount of info was so high that we believed that they could not treat that.
Right.
Now what we are seeing in the last tax audits is that the tax authorities, the tax auditors, they are starting to use this information.
Okay.
So,
how so? What are
we
they
already saw some companies, let's say they are not still able to get this information and send you, for instance, electronic tax assessment based on this information. This is not happening still. This does happen when you have, for instance, you pay, you put in your information that you paid an amount of income tax and you don't pay that, they send you an electronic assessment. But they're still not sending based on your accounting information, your payroll information automatically. But what we see is that this information, they are tax auditors, they are starting to use that. So I think that in the next years, they are going to develop systems and things like that will send you automatically tax assessment based on this kind of information. My recommendation, Roger is here, just a minute.
Yes.
My recommendation is that this is something in Brazil nowadays that you need to negotiate budgets inside your company. You really need to prove if you are part of a tax department in Brazil, you really need to prove to your bosses, to your leaders, that you have to waste money with that. You have a lot of companies, a lot of software. You have expensive ones, you have very cheap ones. So we really need to be careful to choose the software and the company that will treat all this data. So I'm not going to do any kind of merchandise, but you should try to get companies that are more known in the market, because this is something very important nowadays. And Rogerio is here, and then he for sure has a lot of experiences.
Thoughts? Well, I'll take a quick interruption. Rogerio here is with us. He made it for the last, I guess, half an hour of the presentation. It's great to have you here, Rogerio. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself to our listeners and then comment on Brazil's electronic tax system? I know you got here at during the middle of Ronaldo's comment on it, but I mean, if you have anything to add on Brazil's electronic tax system, the amount of data that is being collected, and how successful it has been, what are its pluses, minuses, etc.
Mateo, Mateo, are you listening?
Yeah, we hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, your microphone is cutting out, so I quite do not understand what you're talking about. Could you repeat, please?
Yes, I'll repeat it. Can you first introduce yourself quickly? Just tell us who you are, and then comment on Brazil's electronic tax system, the amount of data that is being collected, some of the benefits, the disadvantages. It's a question that we got from one of our listeners, so we can get your comments, and then we'll jump on to the next question.
Mateo,
probably yes, your microphone is okay, but I think I understand what you have asked for. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Rogério Leite Araújo. I'm the tax manager for Arista Brazil, responsible for Latam countries, basically Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, Chile, and of course Brazil. Let me also make some excuses because I have some important things to deal with for business purpose. This is the reason I wasn't able to join at the time that was scheduled. Really sorry for that. And you are talking about, I think you mentioned about the SPED, this the program that the government had implemented in 2008. And this is I think breakthrough program that most countries in Latin and also in other countries are copy and paste from Brazil, because it helped a lot in terms of enhancing compliance in Brazil. The government was able to raise the tax collection in terms of indirect tax. Indirect taxes, it's a key collection in Brazil. And we see also, since 2008, several new deployed systems that link it to the SPED that help the government to monitoring the taxpayer basically on time. Okay. This is the thing that we are facing right now. And the big challenge for the taxpayer in Brazil, mainly in Brazil, is to anticipate the facts, to anticipate the problems we may face through the data that we submit on a daily basis to the government. So basically, government are able now to get those data, cross-checking through the tax returns, the invoices, and the other auxiliary documentations, and immediately issue a notice to the taxpayer if they find any inconsistencies. So they basically, you are going to receive the notice on a daily basis if the government find this inconsistency. So the main challenge for taxpayers in Brazil is to anticipate those facts, to have a good system, to do this cross-check previously to the submission of any tax return, if it's possible also before to issue an invoice, observing all those parameters required, because we have a lot of tax codes that we needed to fill up in the invoice, and they are very critical, and each one is respected for a specific tax. I don't know if Ronaldo have already gave some background regarding the number of the taxes we have in Brazil, but because Brazil is more focused on the indirect taxes, we have 5 taxes on that could be have the same basis on the same transaction. So it's very crazy environment, and to have a good system, to work proactively, and observing all those parameters before the submission, any tax return, or even the invoice, is a key factor to avoid any tax assessment in Brazil.
Excellent.
And Matheus, just one thing to complete, and Rogério, what Rogério talked is, and why I mentioned that it's important to have a good company, someone that's recognized in the market to take care of this, because usually companies in Brazil, they make the outsourcing of these activities.
Right.
So outsourcing will be responsible to get all the information inside the systems of the company and make a translation of that information for the government. And my concern as a lawyer, and this is something that I had already faced a lot of situations, the responsibility of this information. Right. So when there is a mistake, when you have a tax assessment that you received because the information was sent wrongly, who is responsible for that? So the responsibility is inside the company. Right. The responsibility is for the outsourcing company. So this is the kind of discussion that we are going to face in the future. Right. So again, this is why I said that you really need a company also in conditions to be responsible for fines and penalties that the taxpayers in Brazil will start to receive for sending wrong information in these electronic files. Yeah. So this is something that people they do not take care of this issue, but this is important too.
Yeah. No, again, very, very good point, Ronaldo. And the main thing that all the companies in Brazil have to bear in mind is that you can only outsource the operation, and you cannot outsource the risk. Right. The risk is still belongs to the company. So of course, even you are okay. I'm transferring the operation for a third party, even a big four. So now I'm comfortable that I will not have any problem in the future. But this is not the the truth. In the end, the risk is still on the company side. And imagine that some companies, they have a big turnover, pay a lot of taxes during the year. Any outsourcing company can support in terms of P&L if they should pay a big amount of a penalty if something goes wrong during the process. So I believe that there's something that should be reinforced during the discussion. Send some portion of the tax operation to the third parties, that the risk is still on the company side.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, that really makes sense. Excellent. Let's move on to our next question. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, I can hear.
Excellent. This is a question that I actually, it's probably the one that I am most excited about. It sounded very interesting regarding the tax compliance program named Nos Conformes in the state of Sao Paulo. Basically, say that they just launched a groundbreaking tax compliance program, and the program is intended to foster tax compliance and transparency by grading taxpayers according to their tax behavior. So that sounds very unique. Sounds very kind of avant-garde, I would say. So can you comment a bit on this program and about how it's working, whether it's been implemented already? Rogerio, let's get started with you.
Okay. Yes. In fact, it is a real breakthrough program. Of course, from taxpayer side, there are some concerns about the implementation of the program, because the bar is very high. Okay. in terms to receive a good rating. This is the word that we are going to use to rating the taxpayer in the future. So, but the purpose of the Nos Conformes, I think, is to have more transparency between taxpayer and tax authorities. Okay. And promote, I think, this good relationship between each other. I would mention that, for example, in some countries that I deal with, for example, Mexico, when the tax authorities, before issuing a tax assessment, they are going to discuss with the taxpayer and asking him for more clarification. And during this period, the taxpayer is allowed to rectify the information or pay the taxes that he owes without any penalty, without any further consequences. I believe this program is put in place to achieve that target, and you'll be something that, in the end, if, of course, all those gray areas that they are discussing to implement that will be solved, I believe you reach that target, that create this kind of good relationship between tax authorities and the taxpayers. There are some discussions how to receive a good ratio. Some of them, I believe, will require from the taxpayer side to put a lot of controls in terms from whom the taxpayer is going to buy, if this supplier also have or not a good rate, and something like that. So, but in the end, I believe the program is good for tax perspective.
Excellent. Ronaldo, any comments on this program?
Yeah. I worked for almost 2 years in the Ministry of Finance here in Brazil, and I was one of the persons that analyzed the tax assessments and helped to decide if the fine, the penalty should be kept or not. So, and one discussion that we had is that why all the taxpayers need to have the same treatment regarding penalties and things like that, because sometimes you make just one single mistake, one mistake that is not so relevant, and sometimes you make a lot of mistakes. Right. You try to hide from tax auditors the calculation, and the penalty is the same.
Right.
So why should we treat the same way these two taxpayers? And the answer that we use to receive on that is that no, you cannot in Brazil treat differently taxpayers. So this is in our constitution. Everybody should receive the same treatment. So if the penalty is 100% of the taxes, it's a 100% penalty if you make one mistake or if you make 1 million of mistakes.
Right.
And this is a very old discussion. So I think that São Paulo makes something, and Rogério, of course, Rogério is more concerned about how company A or company B will be rated on that. Of course, you need to be concerned about that.
Right.
For me, what is more important is that it's a first step in Brazil that shows that taxpayers can be treated differently.
Right.
So if you are a good taxpayer and you make a mistake, you will be better treated by tax authorities than if you are a company that does not pay taxes and try to hide all the information from tax authorities. So this is good. I also don't know. We have no idea. This is something really brand new. We have no idea about the criteria that will be used. But it shows that, okay, the tax auditor, the tax authorities can talk to companies and create better conditions for better taxpayers. Right. So this is something good.
I mean, and to be honest with you, it makes perfect sense. It's something that is very obvious that would actually, benefit and reward those people who actually pay their taxes and who, follow the rules, etc. So it's almost a reward system, I guess. It makes perfect sense. Excellent.
And just to reinforce this, we are just talking about the one level of tax authorities, only state.
Okay.
We have more 26 in Brazil, 26 states. So that's something that they need to also share with the other states, and also to be implemented by federal government and the municipal government, I believe. Or they should think in something more centralized, responsible for that kind of non-conformism on federal level. I believe should be something that should be worked by through the three levels of government that we have in Brazil. And the concern about the duration, it's right, because imagine that I don't know in what extent those information will be shared with the market, and you might receive a bad ratio, and you don't know why you received that. Probably because you submit late tax return, or you made a late payment, and because of that you will receive a bad ratio.
Right.
But that's something that the company should work around and prove that it was not intentionally or something that was not made to make anything tax avoidance.
Right.
Because this uncertainty and clarity in this point, I don't think at this stage if you feasible or not the implementation, but the intention of the program is very good.
Excellent. We just got another question from one of our members. This comes from the United States, and basically the question is: how active are the Brazilian tax authorities in the enforcement efforts against taxpayers who utilize offshore structures? Basically, whoever is using an offshore structure to maintain wealth outside of Brazil. I mean, how active? What is the role of Brazilian tax authorities? How do they handle these situations? Can you give us some insight into that? Ronaldo, you want to get us started there?
Yes. In the last months, I would say that less than 1 year, Brazil started to sign agreements of mutual procedure, not the mutual procedure that is on BEPS, but to this kind of what we call here the TEAA, that's for exchange of information agreements. So Brazil had signed one that's really important with Switzerland. Of course, we know that offshores, they are not exactly in Switzerland, but signing an agreement with Switzerland for the exchange of information is something that is something relevant and shows that Brazil authorities, they are looking at that. There is negotiation to sign also with the United States, and other relevant countries, but not with typical tax havens.
Right.
I think that this is not going to happen, but they are looking at that. 2 years ago, we have in Brazil the repatriation of funds legislation.
Okay.
They give a lot of tax benefits to bring the money back. Okay. After people decided to repatriate the money, they start to have a big discussion if they should receive a tax assessment on that or not. Tax authorities decided to assess everybody and start sending the tax, but then suddenly they stopped it. I think that they received orientation from the president to stop assessing people that was repatriating the funds.
Okay.
So, of course, we always have, in everything that happens here in Brazil, we have discussions. So it's not safe, it's not, but they're starting to look at that. And here with the Lava Jato and all the other federal investigations, this is something that's on the top of mind of people. Right. So everybody's really careful about offshore investment, and you need to take care. You need to put that on your declaration, on your income tax return, because they are finding information and they are receiving a lot of information about offshore companies. But look, this and there is one thing that's extremely relevant because people make a lot of confusion of that. It's not illegal. It's not illegal to use offshore companies here in Brazil. And this is something important. It's not illegal. The only thing that you have to do is not to hide information. So you don't need to run to your offshore company, bring all the money back, and be desperate about that. No, you can keep things as they are. There is no discussion about the legality of that. You should only be careful and not hide the information from Brazil authorities.
Excellent. Rogério, anything to add?
If I have to add something here in this good background that Ronaldo gave to us, that we are living in the BEPS world. So it means transparency. We will be more required every day. So this the kind of way that taxpayer used to restructure the operation in order to reduce the tax payments or tax burden will disappear somehow. And as he mentioned, as Ronaldo mentioned, every operation should be very transparent. Now Brazil also adopt the CBC, country by country report, so need to disclose everything to the tax authorities. So there is no way to operate in a way to hide the information from the tax government, because it would be more require more transparency in the following years.
Excellent. There's actually a follow-up question for you guys from the same person, again related to offshore assets. Can the income tax on offshore income be deferred until the offshore asset is dropped or disposed?
Sorry, Matteo, your microphone is not working well.
Sorry.
Your image is a little freezing.
Okay. Can income tax on offshore income be deferred until the offshore asset is disposed? Could you hear me?
Didn't get that.
No, I think he's asking if offshore income can be deferred until
the offshore asset is disposed or sold, I guess, or once you get rid of the offshore asset.
I think Ronaldo can complement, but what I have seen is that the Brazilian government is requesting for the taxpayer that have profits on its subsidiary abroad to recognize this profit as taxable at the moment that it's declared in the accounting statement. It's not only only he pays or effectively remit the dividends. So I don't think it's possible to defer. I saw that there are some
There's a
judicial.
decision of the Supreme Court.
It's the Supreme Court also, huh? Yeah, you can complement one.
No, you have. We had a discussion for years because we have a change in our legislation in 2001, not allowing defer the taxation of the dividends when it's already recognized in the balance sheets of your company abroad. So, and there was a discussion in the Supreme Court, and now I think that's clear. If the company in Brazil has the control of the company that is located abroad, of the offshore company, should tax the profit in the moment that is recognized in the balance sheet. You cannot defer that.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. I think that answers our members' question. We have two more questions. Let's wrap up with two more, and we'll extend it for another 10 minutes, and then we can just call it a close and go enjoy our weekend. I know Rogerio has more pressing things on his table right now. But let's talk a little bit about the Reintegra tax benefit, which was reduced from 2 to 0.1%. Do you want to comment on that, Ronaldo? Get us started there.
Yes. This is one thing that happened very recently in Brazil, and this is one of the effects that I mentioned in the very beginning of our webinar about how taxpayers, how companies in Brazil are struggling to keep the tax benefits. So Reintegra was one of these tax benefits. That there was a reduction of the rate from 2% for 0.1%. It's a tax incentive that is for exportation, for export companies. So you see, that's crazy because you make an investment in Brazil, you create a new business, you make the calculations that you have that you need to do to the shareholders, and suddenly there is a reduction on one of the incentives that you have, and that there was not under discussion. This is something that is very important, and Rogerio can also. Suddenly, one day we wake up, and here, Mateo, in Brazil, we have a WhatsApp group, and a WhatsApp group of tax experts that we have around 200 people. And Rogerio is one of the heads of this group. He's the big head of the group. And every day we wake up, and when I wake up, just to give a bit of humor on that, I use it before I was not part of this group. I didn't have problems in take my phone and look at the messages. So at the moment that I became part of the tax experts group on WhatsApp, I wake up, I take a shower, I get a coffee, I think about life, I do everything that is fun on my day before looking at the messages. Because every single day we have a lot of crazy.
Sorry for that, my friend.
Yeah, no. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. But you see, Reintegra was on one of these. It was never under discussion. So we know that tax benefits in Brazil in general, they are under discussion because of our economic situation and that. But nobody received it, and Rogerio can confirm if I'm right, but nobody had any idea that Reintegra benefit would be reduced. And they tried to make the reduction. They didn't announce a reduction of the benefit for 1, 2, or 3 years. No, they simply announced the reduction instantly. So now, the benefits reduced. And Reintegra is one of these examples. So I think that Rogerio can help me to explain that. But what happened is now in 2018, there was a sudden reduction, and some taxpayers, they are discussing that on courts. But I didn't see favorable decisions about that. So it's something that is being negotiated between government and companies in order to postpone a bit this reduction. Because this is something that are going to impact a lot export companies in Brazil now in 2018.
Excellent. Rogerio, any comments on Reintegra, or should we just move on to the last question? Go ahead.
I think it's worth to mention that this Reintegra, I don't think this is a kind of tax benefit. It's worth to mention that we exports from Brazil are exempt of any tax, indirect tax, I mean. So we don't need to pay ICMS, IPI, basic fees, and so on. However, during the process of manufacturing in Brazil, those entities, those taxpayers that are going to export, buy inputs internally where their suppliers charge those taxes, ICMS, IPI, and physical fees. The intention of this reintegra is to reimburse that those taxes, the tax that were paid during the manufacture process. So it's not. They wrap up this program as a tax benefit, but in fact, it's just a matter of reimburse of what they paid, what the tax they paid that they should not pay if they export directly. So having said that, it's an absurd, as Ronaldo mentioned, because they do not observe all the constitutional laws that establish the parameter that they have to increase the tax burden or to create a new law, a new tax, sorry. Government are aware about that, and my perception is that, okay, let's put this something on the legislation. Some taxpayers are going to complain through the court. Most of them are not going to complain. So in the end, in the balance, I'm able to collect more taxes. Even some taxpayers are going to complain to the court. And we are on the year that the end of the government term. This year we are going to have an election, so for presidential election.
Right.
So we are living a political crisis and economic crisis. So a lot crazy stuff is happening in this country this year.
Right.
So this is one that also very very unpolite thing in order to raise the collection taxes, they put something that's against the constitution,
right,
and charge more taxes than they should do, because in fact this is just a reimburse what taxpayer have paid in excess.
Excellent.
Adding just one detail about what Rogério mentioned, Matteo.
Yep.
In Brazil, it's very clear nowadays that if you want to hire the rate of income tax, for instance, you have to wait for the new year. If you want to collect more ICMS and you need to change the rate, you have to wait 3 months to do that. But it's still not clear in our judiciary decisions now what happens if you decide to reduce a benefit.
Right.
Although Rogério does not consider this exact as a tax benefit, but it's not clear for us if you want to reduce a tax benefit, if you really need to wait to implement that.
Right.
So in all the decisions, in all the discussions that we have, our judges use it to consider tax benefits as a kind of favor. So
right,
it's not something that is, so they can be reduced at any time.
Right.
So it's a gift from the government for you. Congratulations. So we can use it and take that anytime. So in the next years, we are going to face this discussion. So if I have a tax benefit and it's canceled, what's the period of time that should be taken consideration for this reduction?
Excellent.
This is something new. We need 10, 15 years to solve that.
Right. Perfect.
Imagine it for business perspective that in the beginning of the year you're planning how much tax you are going to pay during the year, and suddenly they change everything.
Right.
They change everything in the middle of the game.
Right.
And I say, okay, my projection of the taxes is something around 1 million, but suddenly goes to 2 million, and this is okay. Now, how can we structure optimum cash flow if you don't know how much tax you are going to pay during the year.
That makes perfect sense.
This is one thing that at least a Brazilian manager, tax managers, who is dealing with who is responsible for tax cash flow, struggling to predict during the year.
Right. Let's have one final question as concluding remarks. You have a question here about the Brazilian Internal Revenue Service announcing its tax audit program for 2018. Can you point out some of the possible topics that the Brazilian IRS will place greater focus on, and what sort of information they'll be looking for? Let's start with Ronaldo.
Sorry, Matteo, again, there was a freeze in your image and the voice is not clear. Did you understand that, Rogério?
Yes, I think
I
understood. He's asking about the Brazilian IRS tax audit program for 2018. It's pretty similar to the 2017. I don't know if you want to comment something that I will complement.
Go ahead, Ronaldo, as concluding remarks. Just tell us a little bit about what's planned.
Okay, no, that's what Rogério mentioned. That is very similar to what we have in 2017, right? What I believe that happened is there was an expectation from the Brazil tax authorities that the collection of taxes would grow in 2018 if you compare to 2017. This is not true. What we hear is that this is not happening. And in 2017, we had in the end of the year the REFIS program that they call it now PERT, P-E-R-T program. And
it's a kind of amnesty program.
Okay. Yeah, the tax amnesty program. It started in 2017, and there was a big collection of money in the end of the year. For 2018, when we look what the tax authorities they show in the beginning of the year the plan, it's quite similar to what we have in 2017. They are looking at the international cross-border operations. They are looking at transfer pricing. They are. What we see is that there is goodwill amortization. So what we have seen is that the focus is on the income tax and on direct taxes, because one shot that they give rights on these matters, they are able to get a lot of money. And I don't know, Rogério can complement, but we are not seeing VAT audits a lot, like PIS and COFINS, especially because I think that there is a lot of discussions about the calculation basis and things like that. So they are not looking a lot at the VAT. They are looking a lot for international transactions, for income tax, for the amortization of goodwill, and also what we have seen is that they are looking also more for the income personal taxation. Excellent. For the personal income tax. Yeah, they are sending a lot of tax assessment for people. I believe that the systems related to the income tax of people, it's much more developed, and it's made in a lot of cross checks. So what I have seen in my office, in my practice, is that a lot of people are receiving tax assessment for the last 5 years. They are being charged for things that they imagine that would never happen. Okay. So this is the focus that we have seen. But income tax for companies, income tax, and of course, now in this year, and we have the implementation of one of the programs that is named e-social. That is the implementation, that it's a kind of SPED for payroll information, for payroll tax information. Mm-hmm. So it's starting this year. Companies are starting to send information for the government. I think that in the next years, one of the focus will be the payroll taxes also. But in this year, the income tax. Excellent. And international.
Mm-hmm. Rogério, anything to add? Or as a concluding remark, sort of, and then we'll call it a wrap.
I think this is right. Of course, depends on each company. You have a different figure. Of course, companies that have this ingredient where they have structure where buy from related parties. We have a problem with transfer pricing, or they have acquisitions that will incur in goodwill amortizations. They pay interest on equity. So one, of course, the amount of the tax deduction that we have income taxes, you get the attention from the tax authorities. But I disagree that, from my perspective, that income taxes is on the spot in Brazil. I think our tax authorities are more focused on indirect taxes, transaction taxes, because now this implementation of this BEPS is easy to get mismatches between invoices and between tax return, auxiliary obligations. So for the tax authority's perspective, it's easy to issue a notice asking more information electronically. Don't need to send the tax authority to the taxpayer place. So in my vision is that we have more tax audits seeking raising the collection from indirect taxes.
Okay.
Of course, it depends the company. Each company has its specific structure. When you see that some of them that I mentioned, they have structure where they buy from related parties. So they of course, our areas will require accurate information about the transfer pricing calculation, or they have payments of international equity, R&D expenses, so on. Of course, it will be on the spot of Brazilian IRS.
Excellent. Well, I think that that brings us to a wrap of the webinar. I mean, we did spend a good 80 minutes discussing Brazilian tax. I think we covered a lot of information, and I think it's going to be very useful for our members. To get some admin issues out of the way, we have recorded this webinar. We'll have an audio recording available next week. We'll also have a full transcript that should be available in a couple of weeks.
That's great.
If you have, we'll email everyone and we'll let you know. If you have any follow-up questions for either Ronaldo or Rogério, you can submit them on our forum discussion, and they'd be happy to answer. If there's anything we didn't cover, I think we covered a lot of information. So without further ado, I just wanted to say thank you and have a great weekend. Thanks, Ronaldo. Thanks, Rogério, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks Matteo, thanks so much. Thanks so much, everybody, for having the patience to hear about Brazil tax. And the only thing that I have to say in the end is that I'm not going to talk about football. If you'd like to talk about Samba, we can talk about that. But football, especially because of World Cup, if you want to call me about that, I will not answer questions for a while. Okay, but tax for sure.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, thanks so much, guys. Have a nice.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
Bye.